Hey sketchy friends, Taria from Taria's Sketchy Adventures and urbansketchingworld.com with you today. I want to talk about how to get quicker at urban sketching. I am not a quick sketcher at all. And I regularly spend 2, maybe even 3 hours on an urban sketch, but I'm okay with this. It's one of my favorite ways to spend time, and I'm kind of happy with this. But I do understand that many people would like to fit in their urban sketching habit within a much shorter window of time. People have busy schedules, lots going on, so being able to capture something in a half-hour window, for example, would be much more practical. After all, we want to try and incorporate urban sketching with our regular lives, and it's not very practical for someone to take 2 to 3 hours out of their day on a regular basis to be able to do this. Saying that, I would love to be able to capture scenes much quicker. There are obviously times when this is really beneficial, i.e. when you're visiting somewhere or traveling somewhere with other people that are non-sketchers, and you're on a certain timetable or schedule. And also, if you're just waiting in a waiting room or some kind of queue, be able to whip your sketchbook out and draw something of value is a really nice way to kind of pass that time. So there's absolute value in this topic, and I really want to explore it further with you guys. I've done a bit of thinking, a bit of research, and I want to present to you guys some of my ideas on how you and me, how we can get quicker at urban sketching. Okay, so my first idea is only draw on site and then worry about painting it or adding color later on. So there are a few urban sketchers that do this. The first one that springs to mind is John Harrison. I know this because I did an interview with him probably back in 2020, which you can check out on my YouTube channel. And he did tell me that he only ever draws things on site, and then he adds the watercolor later on from home. And I think this is a great way to be able to incorporate sketching on location into your life. I think he sketches a lot when he walks his dog and things like that. So it's not much just to carry your sketchbook and a pen with you and just whip it out and get your basic sketch in. So I really like that idea. It kind of appeals to my minimalist self, which I'm not a minimalist at all, but I wish I was. It just really appeals to that side of me. And I think it suits his art style as well, because if you've seen John's work, he kind of only paints areas in wet and wear, and it drips and stuff like that. So maybe that's not all that practical if you're trying to be quick on location. Another urban sketcher that springs to mind is Phil Dean, aka Shoreditch Sketcher. Shoreditch Sketcher. If I'm not mistaken, he generally draws his lines on location, and then he also sometimes adds color later on, generally with alcohol markers, again, if I'm not mistaken. And I think that's a really nice way for him to be able to travel. He just has his small sketchbook, his one pen, and off he goes. So there's just something quite liberating about that. By the way, Phil has got a book out about urban sketching. It's called Urban Drawing, and he's got another one on the way, which is exciting. So I think that's due out in the autumn of 2022, and it's called Urban Watercolor, again, if I'm not mistaken. Now, some urban sketchers are quite strict with their own personal rules about sketching on location. So some sketchers will say that what happens on location stays on location, i.e. they don't add anything afterwards. And, they just feel like whatever is done in the moment, that's how it is. And I really like that approach as well. But I think in practical terms, we do have time limitations for whatever reason in our lives. And, if you want to just draw something and then finish it off later on, then that's okay too. You just have to be comfortable to do whatever you feel like doing, and don't worry about anyone else's rules about things. Okay, so my second strategy for how to get quicker at urban sketching is that you don't have to draw everything. It's as simple as that. So if you want to sketch quicker, then forget drawing the entire scene in all of its infinite detail in front of you. What's the most interesting thing in the scene? What's caught your eye? What's made you want to stop and sketch? Or if you're sitting and you're having a coffee, it's just like, right, I'm going to sketch whatever's in front of me. Draw the most interesting thing that's in front of you. So for example, in this sketch that I'm showing on the screen here, I just wanted to draw the front part of this building. I didn't really care about the rest of it, and I had no inclination to draw the streets that disappeared down either way. I just thought that this front of this Spanish building was really, really cool. And that's what I wanted to draw. So that's what I drew. Another thing to think about is that you can even montage smaller sketches together. So that's what I did when I visited Iran. I was with 3 other people, traveling with 3 other people, non-sketchers, and we were on quite a timetable. Like we had a schedule, to keep. So I would just do like a small sketch of each place that we were in where I had time to sketch something. So again, as you can see on the screen, this is my sketchbook spread of a city called Kashan. 4 little sketches, and they kind of flow one into another. And this was entirely by accident, to be honest. I didn't even do it on purpose. It's just what kind of came out. And then I found that this was a great way to record the cities that we were visiting on our trip, because we weren't spending days and days and days in each place. So I did it for all of the different cities, including Persepolis as well. So I think it's just a great way to record a place. For more information on designing sketchbook spreads, I do have a post over on urbansketchingworld.com, but I also have lots of content over on Patreon, because we did an entire month worth of looking at sketchbook spreads. So there's a month's worth of demos over on Patreon on sketchbook spreads if you're interested in that subject matter. So reportage illustrators like George Butler, Lucinda Rogers, Veronica Lawler, Jedediah Dore, to name but a few, they generally only have a certain window of time to be able to capture the story that they want to report on. So George Butler is a conflict artist. You might have heard of him. And you can tell in his work, he has to be really focused on what that story is and what he wants to convey. And you'll see that he only draws parts of scenes, and he'll just really focus in on the main story. So the characters and like a little bit of context to tell what's going on. If you'd like to find out more about the subject of reportage illustration, again, I do have a blog post over on urbansketchingworld.com which gives you a brief overview and mentions a few artists, but I do highly recommend the book called Reportage Illustration, Visual Journalism by Gary Embry and Mario Minichiello. It's a really interesting book, and there's some just awesome stories in there and examples of reportage work. It's an area that I find extremely interesting and that I'd like to really develop into over time. Okay, so the next strategy is keeping it loose and continuous line drawings. Keeping things loose and expressive is a great strategy for sketching quickly. And this style of sketching looks easier than it is, but I find it is very difficult to be loose but still keep a recognizable thing on the page so it doesn't turn into a complete mess. So making something look good is actually quite a skill. Someone who jumps to mind who does this so well is Inma Serrano. She sketches with a continuous line sometimes to describe parts of the scene she's sketching. Also, Suhita Shirodka. She sketches wonderfully loose people and within her scenes, and it's just a really expressive, and I really, really love her style. I've found a lot of sketchers who favour a continuous line approach like this, use a Fude nib fountain pen, such as, this green Sailor Fude fountain pen. It's a very popular pen. I think the variation of line width that you can achieve with the pen is actually why it's a popular choice for people who do like to sketch loosely, because you can be quite expressive with your lines. There's certainly an art to this type of sketching, and it's not always to everyone's taste, but I just love it. And I just need to practice more. I think it's actually a mindset shift that's required, as well as developing the skill. So trying to conquer that need to like control and draw everything as well as you possibly can and as precisely as you possibly can. Okay, so the next strategy is direct watercolor sketching. So this method of sketching may seem a little intimidating. It does to me as well. Mark Taro Holmes has a book entirely devoted to this subject, and he, along with Uma Kelkar, run a 30 by 30 direct watercolor challenge each year. That's where you have to, or the challenge is to do a direct watercolor sketch, one per day for, I think it's usually June that they do it, so it's 30 days. As the name suggests, really, there's no underdrawing. You just go straight in with watercolor, and that's that, basically. I've tried this a few times, but not for a long while, and I had every intention of doing the direct watercolor challenge this June 2022. Didn't happen. But yeah, I have just bought Mark's book, actually, the direct watercolor book. I bought it on as an ebook, so I'm just working my way through that. I think it's quite a skill, but obviously it is a quick way of sketching because there's no messing around with drawing things or anything like that. So you go straight in with watercolor and sketch your sketch. So I think it's something that requires quite a bit of practice, but it looks like a really, really fun way to sketch. And I think it's something that I'd like to explore more in the future. Building on from that, though, I quite enjoy sketching directly with watercolor and laying down certain shapes of color. And then once that's dry, drawing on top of it. So I do have a few videos like that on YouTube that are just kind of sketches of houses or something like that, where I start with the base colors of the house first and the background, and then draw on top and then kind of work on from there. So it's not, the working on from there is not particularly quick, but the idea of loosely painting and then just drawing on top without too much faff after that could be quite quick. The only thing you have to do is just wait for those first watercolor washes to dry. But, you know, depending on your climate, that shouldn't take too long, 5 to 7 minutes or so. I think sketching in this way, directly sketching in watercolor, is just automatically a good way to help you loosen up, because you just cannot be precise with watercolor. It has its own mind. It will do its own thing no matter how much you try and corral it. So starting with that and then sort of coming in with a few defining lines on top is just, yeah, a really great way to help you loosen up. I think also Liz Steele sort of sometimes sketches in this way, where she'll sketch in watercolor and then maybe add a few lines either with ink or a watercolor pencil on top. So yeah, it's definitely a fun strategy that I would recommend you look into. The next strategy I want to mention is using negative space. So in some ways, this is a bit of an extension of the strategy where you don't have to draw everything, but I do believe that it is different. You can draw an entire scene, but incorporate clever use of negative and or white space so that you don't actually have to draw everything in the scene, but it still looks complete. And I personally think Liz Watkins is a master of this. So if you just check out this example on the screen, you can see how she's left the ground blank, save for a few outlines of cobblestones, yet it doesn't really seem blank. It seems as descriptive as the parts that are sketched in or drawn or painted. So you'll also notice a lot of white space in George Butler's work, who we mentioned earlier on, as well as John Harrison as well, that I mentioned in strategy number 1. So you can see that a lot of these strategies that I'm talking about can overlap and be mixed together to create, firstly, a quick sketch, but also a highly stylized sketch as well, something that's really interesting to look at. The next strategy that I want to mention is using selective color. So this is kind of also an extension of the leaving white space strategy, but I quickly just wanted to give you some examples. So as I said, a lot of these strategies overlap, but let's look at Neil Whitehead's style, for example. And he uses a combination of loose continuous line drawing that we mentioned earlier, and he combines that with painting colour in selected places. So he only paints part of the scene. Notice how he doesn't colour anything in, for lack of a better term, and he just provides a loose splash of colour here and there. It's so expressive and it looks deceptively simple, but if you check out this video in the corner of me trying Neil's style out, you'll see quite how tricky it is to pull this kind of thing off, successfully at least. And John Harrison, who I mentioned earlier, he also uses selective colour. And another urban sketcher I would love to mention is Simone Ridyard. She does wonderful architectural sketches and also just use little pops of watercolour as focal points, and it's just a really beautiful effect. So my final bonus strategy, which is a bit tongue-in-cheek really, is get a smaller sketchbook. If there's a smaller sketchbook, you have to draw smaller and therefore it takes less time, right? Anyway, so on that note, guys, I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope it has given you some inspiration on a variety of techniques that you can try to speed up your urban sketching. I am going to be trying certain strategies in the next few episodes. I'm going to go out, I'm going to set a timer for 30 minutes, and whatever I sketch in that 30 minutes is whatever I sketch. Let's see how I go. I'm hoping that by maybe the 3rd or 4th episode of this series, that I'll actually be able to sketch something in 30 minutes. So let's see how we get on. I'd love to hear from you if you're going to try this out too. Or let me know what your favourite strategies to sketch quickly are. And I will see you in the next video.